For FST, Lesson 6.5 on Contingency Tables. A contingency table is simply students taking a table and dividing different outcomes by two or more categories or variables. Mostly what students are going to be doing is reading this lesson and looking at the different tables that are given related to the Titanic. The data that's given is typically listed in survival versus not surviving, and based on what class you're on the ship. If you're on a different class, or if you buy a different class ticket, that could determine where you are on the ship in terms of what level closest to the top deck. So first class is typically the top deck, second class would be the deck below that, and so on. And so there would be some correlation between how close you are to the deck when the ship starts to sink and whether or not you would survive. So all that students are really looking at in this lesson is trying to figure out how the questions are worded and how they're going to come up with the percent. So we're going to start with a nice easy one. Out of all the people on the Titanic, what percent survived? So of all the people on the Titanic, that's going to be what we're going to divide by, the total here. And so on this one, we'll need to figure out what the total is. So you'd have to take all the numbers here in the table and add them up. Sometimes the totals are given in the table, sometimes they're not. So when you add up all the total here, you should get 2201 if you add up all the numbers given in this first table. And then the number of people that survived. So that would be the total number of people that survived. So that would be the top row here. We would need the total for that. And so when you do that, you get 711. Then when you divide, just make sure you do top divided by bottom. It does ask us to round to the 10th. So when you divide there, you should get 32.3%. Moving on to questions B and C. Hopefully A wasn't too difficult for you. B and C, I want to take a look at how they're worded, because how they're worded is going to change how you're going to set it up. On B, it says find the percent of passengers in first class who survived. The way that these are worded, the first thing that's mentioned, passengers in first class, that's going to be your denominator. So first class total is going to be on the bottom. And then first class with the other thing that's mentioned is going to be on the top. So the first class survivors. So the first class survivors is going to be where survivors and first class intersect here in the table, so that's 203. And then the first class total is going to be everybody in first class, so this column, so 203 plus 122. Make sure, students, when you're adding there that you do add before you hit divide. There are imaginary parentheses around those two bottom numbers, so make sure you add first. When you divide there after you've added and you round to the 10th, you get 62.5%. So now let's contrast that to our final question here, question C. Find the percent of passengers who survived that were in first class. So again, the first thing listed here, passengers who survived. So the survivor total is what we're going to do on the bottom. And then we're still going to do first class survivors on the top. So the top number will remain the same. We're just going to divide by a different amount underneath it, and that's going to give us a different result. So we're still going to have 203 on the top, first class survivors, but the total number of survivors is what we're going to divide by this time. So we're going to divide by that 711 number. And so when you divide by 203 by 711 and round to the 10th and change to a percent, you get 28.6%. So the percent of passengers who survived that were in first class was 28%, but the percent of passengers in first class who survived is a different number, that's 62.5%. So that's what students will be practicing in the homework, is looking at the tables and trying to answer the questions accurately. Since there are so many tables involved, I want to point out a couple things about tables in general. You want to watch out for tables that show percents. The percents may be showing in a row or in a column. For example, in table number 2 in the textbook, you'll see that the percents here are listed in column form. You can tell because the sums will add up vertically to 100%. So the percent in first class that survived with 62%, the complement to that then would be the percent of first class people who died. So those two together should add up to 100%. The book also does a decent job of showing how this information can also be put into tree form, and then you could do percents from the tree as well. So know that paying attention to how it's organized will make a difference in terms of how you're going to calculate. So we've got another table that I just want to quickly peek at. This table has percents listed now by the row. So the row here is showing percent of survivors that are in each class. So of the people that survived, 29% of them were in first class, compared to the information that we did with the columns, where we were talking about 62% of the first class people survived. And again, they show it in tree form. Last thing I want to mention is that there are some vocab words in the reading that students want to take a look at. In particular, make sure you read page 391 and look up a confounding variable, Simpson's paradox, and the aggregated data. Those are not things that I'm going to be testing or quizzing on, but they are things that students will need in order to answer all of the homework questions accurately.